Chapter 101 The Genius Sets Off Again, Part 1. As night fell in New York, the city lights gradually went out, leaving only the top few floors of Stark Tower with faint lights. Pepper, who had been busy all day, stepped onto the elevator. When the elevator indicator light came on, she took a deep breath, but she didn't completely relax. The elevator doors opened, and the ceiling lights lit up one by one as she walked, guiding her to Stark's laboratory, a place she hadn't visited in a long time. The laboratory door opened slowly without making a sound. The entire laboratory was pitch black, with only the lights from the experimental instruments dimly illuminating the room. Stark lay slumped over the lab table, seemingly asleep. Jarvis turned on a soft light, enough for Pepper to see her feet without waking Stark, who was fast asleep. When Pepper went over, she noticed his brow was furrowed. She saw a pile of documents on his lab bench. In the past, those documents contained experimental data that Pepper couldn't understand. But today, Pepper saw several books that shouldn't have been there. Social engineering, game theory, political science, international relations, and so on. Pepper even saw several of her own university textbooks there, all of which showed signs of being flipped through, and some were even open and face down on the table, clearly indicating that Stark hadn't finished reading them yet. She moved closer and picked up the documents, which mostly contained intelligence related to the military, Congress, and S.H.I.E.L.D., especially information about their personnel. Pepper was about to walk around the lab table to Stark's side when Stark moved, coughed, and woke up. In the dim light, he saw Pepper standing in front of him and thought he was dreaming. Stark shook his head and blinked hard, looking very confused. Pepper often saw him with this expression, usually after drinking or staying up all night doing experiments. "Oh, you're here. Are you done with your work? How have you been lately?" Stark seemed a little flustered, as if he hadn't seen Pedo for so many days and felt somewhat unfamiliar with him. He greeted him in a somewhat awkward tone. Pepper, however, was unaffected by him. She walked over and asked, "What's wrong with you? Why are you reading these books?" Stark glanced back at his desk, his expression resembling that of a child caught secretly playing video games by their parents. He twisted his neck awkwardly and said, "A friend recommended this book, saying I should read more of these kinds of books. Otherwise, I won't be able to handle those troubles." Stark paused for a moment, then lowered his head, his voice low and unusually serious. S.H.I.E.L.D., the military, and Congress have basically gotten what they wanted. What follows will be the final negotiation in this matter. I represent Stark Industries, and I know that this time no one will handle these troubles for me. I have to learn to deal with all of this myself. I've never participated in any proper negotiations. Sometimes, even when I did go, I just had to sit there and wait for Uncle Obadiah to finish talking. I'm just a symbol. Everyone knows I'm a genius, so even if I show impatience or leave early, no one dares to say anything. I know I'm really terrible. I've made a huge mess and caused a lot of trouble. I've mocked the other person's representative as an idiot, or deliberately made a mess of coffee all over the table so I could leave sooner. I can't even remember how many times I've done something this stupid, but I know that this time I have to do it myself." Stark rubbed his eyes, then rubbed his face with both hands, trying to hide the sad and disappointed expression. He said, "No one will do these things for me anymore. No one will solve these problems for me anymore. And no one will even see my inventions or listen to my brilliant ideas anymore." Pepper had to admit that this was the first time she had ever seen Stark look so sad. In the past, he would make sad faces to make jokes or to amuse people, but now he was genuinely sad. After a moment's pause, Stark clapped his hands and said, "Okay, that's settled then. I can handle all of this, right? I'm Stark. How could I not? How much harder can these things be than building a Jaeger? Just watch. Once I've read through all these documents and books, I'll be able to take them down by myself in the negotiations a few days from now." Pepper felt a pang of sadness. Before this, whenever Stark acted spoiled and didn't want to do something, she felt a headache coming on. She felt that she was wasting too much time coaxing this big kid and hoping that Stark could mature quickly. But now, as Stark calmly accepts doing what he doesn't want to do, Pepper suddenly wishes he could still be as willful as before. She didn't know what was wrong with her. Stark had matured, which should be a good thing, but Pepper knew all too well that such growth would inevitably be accompanied by intense pain and sorrow. She would rather Stark never have to experience this pain and live forever in a utopia. Pedo choked up, and just as she was about to say something, her phone rang again. She had no choice but to leave to answer it, and before she could even chat with Stark, she had to deal with the seemingly endless work again. Stark watched Pepper's departing figure, his pain and helplessness reaching their peak. He braced one hand on the lab table and covered his eyes. He had never realized how long the New York night could be. When he was engrossed in his experiments, the night seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. Before he could finish even a small part of the experiment, dawn would break. He would always complain that such pure and happy times were too short. But tonight's darkness seems endless, as if no matter how long he suffers here, the sun will never rise. In the dim and dark room, Stark thought that what the book said made sense. In this world, not everything can be overcome by simply rushing through in a mech suit. Humans cannot survive outside of social rules. As long as they live in this society, they must abide by some of these rules. Stark previously thought he didn't have to follow any rules, didn't have to think about anything, and could live as he pleased every day. But now he realizes that someone else is paying the price for following the rules for him. They paid the price first so that Stark could live in this warm eggshell forever, without thinking about anything. Stark knew that Pepper was busy until midnight every day dealing with his sex scandals, and that Obadiah had cleaned up all sorts of messes for him more than once. But since the kidnapping, reality has been like a heavy hammer, smashing open the fledgling's shell and letting the cold winds of reality blow on its still-growing feathers, making it tumble a few times, get covered in mud, and then struggle to get up again. After the warm wings he craved left him, he had to face everything on his own. The cold wind howled over this nest perched on the cliff, but Stark had to learn to fly on his own. After a while, Stark seemed to accept the fact. He slowly tidied up the scattered documents on the table, then put bookmarks on the various books and put them aside. He picked up one of them and continued reading. In fact, Stark didn't know if what he was doing would be of any use. When he learned from Schiller that the parties had almost prepared their bargaining chips and only the final step of negotiation to divide all the benefits remained, Stark had never felt so anxious and flustered. For many years he had never thought about these things, but at least he knew that if he did nothing, it would be tantamount to giving up the entire Stark group, abandoning his father, his uncle, and all his hard work. If he doesn't take this step, Stark Industries will only keep retreating until they are completely exploited and divided up. Now, no one else can turn the tide and save the day under these circumstances except for Stark himself. For many years of his life, he had never had to consider anyone else's feelings. Now, he was about to participate in what might be the highest-level negotiations in the country, involving longtime politicians, behind-the-scenes SHIELD agents, and an aggressive and insatiable military leader. Stark, in this situation, was like a primary school student suddenly thrown into a doctoral forum. He had no theoretical knowledge or practical experience, and he didn't even know how to read people's expressions. Stark could already imagine that his previous unreasonable and irrational actions would only allow these wolves to make a big fuss and take a bigger bite out of him, and would have no other purpose. He had to learn to stay calm, to remain composed, and to use his wit and skill to wage a war without gunfire on a battlefield without the sound of gunfire. This is not easy, nor is it any easier than starting a real war. Stark was like a newborn baby. On Schiller's advice, he could only start learning from the theory first. Not all politicians are skilled in these things, but they do have a wealth of practical experience. Stark was a complete novice in this area, but fortunately he was a genius. His brain allowed him to memorize all the knowledge in a very short time. Even if there was no time for him to practice and integrate it, having this knowledge in his mind was better than having none at all. Stark thought Schiller made sense. Since he had already decided to humble himself and learn these theories that he had previously disdained to read and thought were just empty talk, he should try to read them as quickly as possible and try to understand them. The former was not difficult. Stark's genius brain allowed him to memorize several books in almost one night. When his brain was working at its peak, he had a photographic memory. However, reading and memorizing are two completely different things from understanding and applying them. After Stark finished memorizing, he still had to refer to the information on his interpersonal relationships and connections to figure out how to act. How will some of them react to certain topics? Within the same faction, what are the intricate subdivisions? Which relationships can be exploited? Why are some people's bottom lines lower than others? And why are some people willing to pay higher prices than others? These questions nearly overwhelmed Stark, and even as a super genius, he couldn't learn the essence of human knowledge overnight. More importantly, game theory and psychology sometimes seem more like mysticism, because human nature is always mysterious and unpredictable. Using theories to analyze everything will only lead to more and more wrong answers. Everything still depends on on-the-spot reactions, which really puts a lot of pressure on Stark. Finally, in the deep darkness of New York, Stark muttered, "You're a genius. Stark, You're a super genius. There's no one in the world smarter than you, of course you're no problem. Then, as his voice faded away, he drifted off to sleep, just as a crimson glow began to appear on the New York skyline. Chapter 102 The Genius Sets Off Again, Part 2. When Peter stepped into the laboratory, he was still feeling the chill of the morning air, and the cold wind had made his cheeks a little red. He exhaled and put down his backpack. The warm air in the lab made his forehead slightly sweaty. He took off his coat and tossed it onto the back of the chair. Stark was still a little groggy from waking up. Peter said, "I heard from Dr. Schiller that you're having some troubles. Since school's out today, and I'm not interested in those football games, I think we can work together to solve these problems. But first," he pulled a bag out of his backpack, holding it a little too tightly because it was so hot, and said, "I brought the best pancakes from near the school. Luckily, I swung them fast enough, so they're still warm." Then he turned around, glanced at the coffee machine in the corner, put the bag of biscuits aside, and ran to the coffee machine. While fiddling with it, he said, "Let's have a coffee. Dr. Schiller's espresso is too bitter. I really can't stand it. Let me see. I'd like a double milk, double sugar latte." "What do you want, Mr. Stark?" Stark sat by the window, propping his head up with his hand. His head was still a little dizzy. Peter, busy running around, exuded a youthful energy and vitality unique to his age, like a bustling New York morning. Although it seemed too eccentric and even a bit comical, it was this vitality that made Stark's heart, which had been frozen during the night, beat again. Peter held up 2 cups of coffee on a tray in one hand and a bag of biscuits in the other, then dumped them all on the table. Peter unwrapped the tortilla, squeezed the included sauce onto it, and handed it to Stark. Stark didn't really like receiving things, but he took it anyway and took a bite. Actually, Peter and Stark have different tastes. Peter likes to eat things with strong seasonings and likes to add all kinds of sauces, but Stark prefers a lighter taste. He took a bite of the tortilla, and the somewhat pungent seasoning masked the aroma of the tortilla itself. In Stark's opinion, it wasn't very delicious. Fortunately, just as Peter said, the pancakes were fresh out of the oven that morning. Peter was incredibly fast, carrying them across most of New York City, and they were still warm. Paired with a fragrant cup of coffee, Stark felt a surge of warmth in his chest, as if he had come back to life. Throughout the entire night, Stark did not feel like crying, or rather, the emotion remained bottled up inside him, unable to reach his eyes. But it was this ordinary breakfast that gave Stark a feeling of salvation. He never imagined that he would be so moved as to cry over a $2 pancake. Peter across from me wasn't eating very well. He squeezed out too much sauce, and a lot of it was still stuck to the corners of his mouth. As usual, he took a big bite and kept chewing it in his mouth. The steaming hot breakfast made him sweat even more, and he tugged at his collar, making his clothes look a little disheveled. This image and this breakfast are completely out of place in the Stark Tower, a place filled with cold metal, high-end experimental instruments, and regularly flashing lights. It's like someone forcibly painting a strip of colored paint onto a cold, neat mechanical part. But Peter was not affected at all. He first quickly finished a pancake, then gulped down a large cup of coffee, and finally slumped back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. Peter wiped his mouth and said, "That's great. I used to only be able to eat here once a week because, this place is delicious, but it's actually a bit expensive. If I ate at the school cafeteria, it would be half the price. But I really don't like the sausages in the school cafeteria, so whenever Uncle Ben gives me pocket money, I'll go eat them. Gwen also likes to eat here, and now we go there for a meal every day after school. I used to complain that there weren't enough seats, but with Gwen, we squeeze into a corner, eat and chat. Is there anything better than that?" Stark glanced down at his hand. What was once a whole pizza was now just a wrapper with some sauce residue on it, and the coffee to his left was empty. "This is the first time I've ever eaten this," Stark said. Peter said with some surprise, "Really? Pancakes are quite popular where we are. Almost everyone at school loves them. You know Thompson, right? I told you about him before, the big guy in our class who plays football. He can eat 5 meals in one go. Last time he insisted that I bring him breakfast. If it weren't for the extra tip he gave me, I wouldn't have carried so many bags." Then Peter said somewhat casually, "But it's okay. There's always a first time. How is it? Not bad, right?" Stark clicked his tongue. He had to admit that human taste buds do crave richer flavors. While those sauces might not be healthy, they were actually quite delicious. After finishing his meal, Peter stood in front of the lab bench, intending to see if Stark had any new mecha ideas. Instead, he noticed the stacks of books and documents. In stark contrast to Pepper, Peter could understand complex experimental data, but he couldn't understand these lengthy explanations at all. He picked up one of the articles, glanced at it, then covered his eyes and said, "I feel like I don't know English anymore. Help. I think I know every single word, but they all seem so unfamiliar. I think sooner or later you'll have to learn these things too," Stark said. Peter shook his head and said, "That's why my dream has never been to start a company or become the world's richest person. I know I don't understand these things. I probably wouldn't even be able to hire a single employee because I don't understand what they're thinking, and I'd probably mess up any business deals." Stark's hand holding the book stiffened for a moment. Peter's words reminded him that he wasn't being forced to learn these things. He had chosen to protect Stark Industries. In fact, if he had chosen to give up the company and become an independent street hero like Peter, he wouldn't have needed to learn these things at all. As long as he has that genius brain, he can build mechs even if he has to scavenge for materials in a junkyard. Why did he choose to save the company? Stark thought. The pain of learning these things didn't seem any less than rummaging through a junkyard. Then Stark thought of Pepper, Obadiah, and his father. Just then, Jarvis announced, "Mr. Steve is here. Close the door and refuse visitors." But it was too late. Steve had already appeared at the lab door, arms crossed, and said, "Schiller said you seem to be in some trouble, so I came here specifically to mock you. Shut up, or I'll put on my mech suit right now and beat you up. I haven't settled the score with you yet for the time you used your mech to blow me up. That's what you deserve." The two exchanged a few words and were about to come to blows when Peter stood between them, stretching out his arms to stop them. Steve said, "I originally had some clues about your father's belongings, but it seems you don't want to hear them." Stark was taken aback. He said with some suspicion, "My father has other belongings. You're not lying to me, are you?" Steve shook his head and said, "I don't know the truth about your father's death, but I know things aren't that simple. He may have been prepared for this." So Stark pursed his lips and asked, "Where's the thing? It should actually be at the old site of Stark Industries, but you'd better not get your hopes up too high. He wouldn't put anything important there." "You mean Howard Motors?" "Jarvis. Isn't that where you got the Obadiah research data last time?" "Yes, sir, but there are two sites of this former location. Stark Industries has relocated, and I have sent Jaegers to search both locations separately." "It seems you really care about your father," Steve said. No, I'm serious. You don't need to deny it. I can only tell you that the operation your father was involved in and his death were not so simple. Steve paused, seemingly hesitant, but still said, "Perhaps in your eyes he wasn't a good father, but in my eyes he must have been a good partner." "What do you think made that difference?" Stark frowned. He sensed that Steve seemed to be subtly hinting at something but unwilling to elaborate, which made him somewhat anxious. He now understood Schiller's intention in having him read these theoretical books. Now, he could find corresponding entries in his mind for every move Steve made, which made it easier for Stark to view his attitude from a more objective perspective. In the past, he would have grabbed Steve by the collar and made him explain his reasons. But now, he could sense that Steve wanted to remind him of something, but couldn't say it outright. Even if he asked, it would only lead to a fight, and Steve might think he was being unreasonable. For the first time, Stark realized the wonderful use of what he had learned. It allowed him to avoid wasting his efforts and also made him appear smarter and more unpredictable in the eyes of others. Steve was somewhat surprised to see that Stark didn't react much and was just standing there thinking. What was wrong with Stark today? Was he sick? He had been prepared for Stark to become hysterical and force him to tell the truth. Does Stark know something too? However, it's not impossible, Steve thought. The Stark family are all extremely intelligent people. Maybe young Stark just didn't like him before, but he should still be reliable when it comes to important matters. Peter couldn't quite understand the subtle atmosphere between the adults, so he asked, "Captain, would you like a cup of coffee?" "No, I just came to deliver a message. I haven't gone for my morning run yet." "Oh, right." Peter pulled a lunchbox out of his bag and said, "This is the lunchbox I took from Dr. Schiller a few days ago. Captain, if you pass by the clinic, please return it to him. Oh, and there are 2 pancakes inside, one for each of you. The sauce is in the compartment next to it." Steve opened the lid, glanced at it, and said, "Take them all to Schiller. I don't like things with too much sauce. In fact, I don't know why you guys love Mexican food so much. The flavor is too strong." "All right, then take them all to the doctor. See you later." Soon after Steve left, Mechs flew in through the window. One of the Mechs was carrying a somewhat worn leather bag. Stark ignored the dust on it, rummaged through it, and found only a rather old-looking notebook inside. Stark opened the notebook and looked at it. Half of the notebook seemed to have been soaked in alcohol. After opening it, he didn't find any useful information. It was indeed Howard's handwriting, but it was mostly nonsense he wrote when he was drunk, along with some random underlines and messy letters, making it impossible to read anything. Stark put down his notebook, feeling both disappointed and relieved. His father had better not play the savior at this time. Howard wasn't someone he should think of in his sadness and despair. A genius, Stark thought. There can only be one genius Stark in this world, and that's him, Tony Stark. Chapter 103, The Genius Sets Off Again, Part 2. Wait a minute. You planned to use this method all along? Then why did you make me read so many books? Schiller was shoving an earphone into Stark's ear, and Stark, trying to dodge, said, "Is this cheating? Damn it. Don't do this. My ears. I've already learned those things. I don't need them. You don't really expect you to learn everything I studied from college to doctorate in just a few nights, do you? You planned to provide off-site guidance all along. You liar. You clearly told me that if I didn't learn these things, Stark Industries would be finished. That's just a macro perspective. I'm not wrong, you'll have to learn these things someday. So why can't it have been yesterday?" Schiller said. Ignoring Stark's attempts to dodge, Schiller shoved an earpiece into one of Stark's ears, saying, "Don't make a fuss. I'm just an off-field translator. It's common, right?" Steve chimed in. Actually, politicians do this too when they're talking business. They have their own teams of staff behind them, and they wear these headsets when giving important interviews. Of course, back in my day, these devices were much more expensive and rarer. Only the most important ones had them. Stark frantically fiddled with the earphone shoved into his ear like he'd been bitten by a flea. He said, "Damn it, why did you create such a desperate atmosphere before? And why did you give me so many books? I stayed up all night memorizing them all." "That's right. If I didn't do this, you would never have seen them in your life," Schiller said. "Okay, let's put that aside for now, but are you sure this will work? Damn it, I should have thought of that sooner. You vampire doctor. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have used such an outdated headset. I would have made a much more advanced, complete monitoring system." Stark slapped his forehead in regret, saying, "Why didn't I think of that before? I could have just let you do it for me. I could have just been a broken record at the event. Even if I didn't know how, as long as you did, wouldn't that have been enough?" Stark was genuinely angry, but not at Schiller. He was angry at himself for not being able to see things clearly. Of course, this is all Schiller's fault. When he came to Schiller seeking a solution, he was very anxious, and Schiller used a very serious attitude and tone, using rhetoric to trap Stark in a mental loop, making him feel that it was abnormal for him not to know these things. It's just that Stark is always detached from worldly affairs. Otherwise, he would know that Obadiah also has a whole think tank behind him, and the entire Stark Industries cannot be decided by Obadiah's mind alone. Stark is a very wealthy man. It doesn't matter if he doesn't know these things. As long as he has money, he has plenty of people who do. If he spent this whole day hiring advisors, he would have assembled a dream team by now. However, Schiller misled him into thinking that he was paying the price for his past willfulness, so he did not consider at all that he still had financial power and genius scientific research ability. Putting aside everything else, even if he were to write an AI facial expression analysis system, it would probably be much faster than him memorizing the text himself. Is this what psychology is? You fraud! Stark gritted his teeth and said, "You studied psychology just to trap people in these kinds of predicaments so you'd pay exorbitant prices for treatment? Don't portray me as an unscrupulous quack doctor. Aren't you an unscrupulous quack doctor? Although he is a bit unscrupulous, he is definitely not a quack." "Mr. Stark, the car has arrived," Jarvis reminded him. "The meeting will officially begin at 10:30, and you are expected to arrive at 10:20. All right, that's settled then." Stark still seemed a little nervous. "That's the only way." Schiller patted him on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry. Once you get there, you'll find that you're not an oddball." Stark got into the car and soon arrived at the negotiation venue. He was late. Most of the people there were already seated. Stark glanced around and noticed that almost everyone was wearing headphones, and some were even openly video chatting on their laptops. On the other end of the screen was a large group of people sitting at a conference table, which was clearly another small meeting room. Stark said to Jarvis, "Deduct Schiller's consultation fees? Deduct them all. Don't let me see his name on the year-end financial report. That damn bastard tricked me." Jarvis said, "The headset has been connected for 13 minutes. Schiller's voice rang in Stark's ears. "It's all right, you can certainly deduct the previous consultation fee, but this kind of political consulting service also has a fee, which is $200,000 per minute. You shit, you vampire doctor. If you don't agree, I'll hang up immediately." No. Wait, I think we can still talk. $200,000 is too expensive. But don't hang up yet. The negotiations are about to begin. What do you want me to say? Meanwhile, in the psychological clinic, Peter and Steve sat at the table listening to Stark's anxious voice. Steve was quite gloating, but Peter felt a little sorry for him. He said, "It seems a bit too expensive, Doctor. I think we can lower the price a bit. You're now part of Stark's staff. Once the money arrives, we'll split it 50-50ths. Before Peter could say anything more, Stark's voice came through again. "Hello? Hello? Negotiations are about to begin. What should I do?" "You don't need to do anything, just wait. In fact, you can completely daydream for the first 30 minutes. You don't need to listen to anything they say." Will this really work? Stark was clearly in a state of high tension. This was the first time he had seriously participated in such a situation, and he felt that he should do something immediately to show results. "Trust me, just stay put." Afterwards, Stark sat there with some doubt, but soon he realized that Schiller's words made a lot of sense, because the first person to speak had actually started talking about World War II. The military representative began reminiscing about their glorious past, starting with the attack on Pearl Harbor. In less than 20 minutes, Stark was already incredibly sleepy. This spokesperson sent by the military was able to recount various battles, which were considered classics, in a way that sounded like a running account. When boasting about the military's achievements and resume, he always used the same set of grand and righteous words. No one could listen to such a speech for more than 10 minutes. In the end, by the time the military finished their first round of speeches, most of the audience was already dozing off. Next up on stage was a representative from S.H.I.E.L.D., and the moment he opened his mouth, Stark felt like he was about to faint, because he started his speech with an Iron Curtain address. The S.H.I.E.L.D. agents were slightly better than the military representatives, possessing extensive knowledge of various intelligence warfare tactics and the history of special operations organizations. However, Stark thought that he was there to participate in negotiations, not to learn modern history. About 40 minutes later, it was Stark's turn to speak. Schiller said, "Open the first draft and just read it. That's all." When Stark opened the manuscript, he was immediately overwhelmed, because the manuscript began with the Industrial Revolution. He spent a full 20 minutes reading the manuscript, finally managing to stumble through it. After he finished, he turned on his headphones and said, "My God, this is the first time I've ever fully understood the history of Stark Industries." To Stark's dismay, it wasn't over yet. Then, starting with the military, they began to talk at length about the evolution of future military organization, the development direction of future weapon systems, and the possibility of World War III, rambling on for another 20 minutes. The S.H.I.E.L.D. agents were the same. They kept talking about the importance of the intelligence organization operating independently of the surveillance system, the future development of individual combat and intelligence warfare, and the path to establishing a global intelligence system. Stark whispered into the headset, "I demand half off this part of the consulting fee. It makes absolutely no sense. It's completely different from what I expected. What kind of scenario are you envisioning?" Schiller's voice came through the earpiece, starting up all sorts of conspiracy theories in a dark room. "The most important thing you need to know is that these negotiations are just a formality," Schiller said. "Everyone knows what the other side has to offer, and everyone knows what they have to offer. The outcome of this negotiation was already decided from the beginning. In fact, even if you act like an oddball like before, not thinking about anything and not listening to anything, the result will not change." This feels even more absurd than having Stark learn those theoretical concepts. It's like learning all sorts of fancy fighting techniques, only to find that you can still defeat your enemy with just one punch. Next, when it was Stark's turn to envision the future, he had already learned to close his eyes and read from the script, even though what it said about the development direction of the mechanical industry seemed like complete nonsense to him. The manuscript concocted and combined certain terms to create some sophisticated-sounding words, making it sound like something out of a tech scam. But Stark shut his brain and read the manuscript without batting an eye. Then came the pleasant part, where the guests and hosts enjoyed themselves immensely. One of the older generals, whose hair was turning gray, said to Stark, "I remember the glorious days of Stark Industries. You Stark were all geniuses, your father was, and so were you. Back then, his research on hovercars was astonishing. But as you know, the military, due to some conservative considerations, didn't cooperate with him, which we truly regret." Before Stark could answer, Schiller said into the earpiece, "He's insulting your dad, saying he's useless and that you're worse than him. Talk back to him." Stark paused for a moment, then mimicked Schiller's words. "Indeed, I believe that most people in the military, like a respectable general like yourself, have a long-term vision. It's just that the times are changing too fast these days." At this point, Nick Fury, sitting at the far end of the negotiating table, said, "In large-scale amphibious landing operations, conventional weapons still have some use. While mechs can significantly improve individual soldier combat capabilities, their adaptability also needs to be considered in group operations." Schiller's voice came through the earpiece. "He's giving you a way out, easing the tension in the negotiations. You can return his smile." Then Stark smiled at Nick, who got goosebumps from the smile. He thought Stark was acting very strangely today, really very strangely. The military and S.H.I.E.L.D. both noticed that something was wrong with Stark, so they got down to business earlier than usual. Then Stark discovered that the main topic of the negotiation took up less than a tenth of the entire negotiation time. First, Nick Fury pointed out that the military might have kidnapped Dr. Connors. The military countered by saying that S.H.I.E.L.D. had orchestrated the kidnapping. After a brief tug-of-war, the military lost slightly and stated that it would question some officers who might have taken drastic actions. Listening to their argument, Stark whispered to Schiller, "They really don't know that we hid Connors? The military might not, but Nick definitely knows. He just needs this kind of stance to show that we should unite against the military. He's already told me that before, so you can continue with confidence." Next, Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. joined forces, overwhelming the military. After all, they had many bargaining chips: the Red Iguana's original form, the antidote Connors might have developed, certain evidence held by S.H.I.E.L.D., and the Jaegers delivered to the military by Stark Industries, among others. In short, the negotiations ended very quickly and in a very absurd way, just as Schiller had initially predicted. The military introduced a scapegoat, namely the Tartu officer faction led by Robert, who were purged. Then the matter was wiped clean, and the military and S.H.I.E.L.D. joined forces to fabricate losses and jointly demand increased military spending. Stark Industries will establish a stable cooperative system with the military and S.H.I.E.L.D., providing some auxiliary individual armor exoskeletons and restarting medical research projects, and will take a larger share of the results. Back at the psychiatric clinic, Stark ripped off his headphones and angrily exclaimed, "You damn bastard doctor!" Before he could finish speaking, a voice came from behind him, "You damn bastard! Stark!" Stark turned around, and Pepper stormed in, tears welling in her eyes. Stark hugged her, and he could hear her heart pounding. Pepper said, "I went to look for you this morning and you were gone. You weren't even wearing your suit. I asked Jarvis, but he wouldn't say anything. I thought something had happened to you. You scared me to death, you bastard." Stark held Pepper tightly and whispered words of comfort to her. The only sounds in the dimly lit room were Pepper's soft sobs and Stark's somewhat muffled low voice. The path of a genius is always destined to be more difficult than that of others, and the sensitive heart of a genius like Stark always suffers more than that of an ordinary person. But at least, this fledgling bird, just about to leave the nest, still had branches to perch on when it flew unsteadily in the biting cold wind. He saw Peter, who was hiding behind the entrance hall, smiling and waving at him, and Schiller and Steve, who were also standing there. He saw the television in the clinic's living room flicker suddenly, and a smiley face made of symbols appeared on the screen. He thought, "Stark, you're a genius." He is not only the smartest genius in the world, but also the luckiest genius in the world. Chapter 104: Bat in a Jar. February 23, 1987. Chicago, night. At the Chicago Grand Theater, Miss Tina, having just finished a glamorous and lively ball, gently stroked her fur shawl. She took the chauffeur's hand and got into a luxury car. When she returned to her luxurious apartment, a handsome man with blue eyes put his arm around her waist. Tina said, "Our ball has only just begun, hasn't it, Mr. Bruce?" Moonlight streamed in through the window, casting shadows on his beautiful blue eyes beneath his brows. His handsome profile captivated Tina. The man turned around. It was Bruce Wayne. On an ordinary afternoon on February 20th, 1987, Schiller woke up in his bed at Falcone Estate. He hadn't forgotten that before he traveled to Marvel, he had been resting in a guest room at the Godfather Estate. Gotham mornings are never sunny, but the early morning always brings Schiller special inspiration. While having breakfast with the Falcone father and son, the professor once again got some inspiration and quickly perfected it in his mind. "What are your thoughts on the future of Gotham?" Schiller asked Falcone. Falcone shook his head and said, "If you had asked me this question 40 years ago, I would have told you that this city was beyond saving. But now I would say that this city doesn't need anyone to save it. It is what it is, and it will always be like this. Do you think Gotham needs a new order?" Many people have asked me this question, but all I can say is that any effort to make this city better will ultimately come to nothing, no matter how inspiring it may be at the beginning. Why is that? You've hit the nail on the head, but I don't know the answer. The Godfather lit a cigar, and as the smoke slowly drifted away, he said, "In these 40 years, I have seen not only staunch revolutionaries, but also saviors with saintly moral character. There are so many people in this world, and there are certainly one or two good people or heroes who are determined to save this city. They came to Gotham with this mindset, and you have to admit, even if you know they won't succeed, you're still deeply impressed by their determination. You might find it ridiculous, but I was indeed changed by these people. Many people might think, if that's true, how did I become the Godfather of Gotham? How did I become the biggest gangster in this gangster city? But it is precisely because I have seen these things and experienced that era firsthand that I know that good people cannot save Gotham, and neither can heroes. So where have these people gone now? Most of them died, but some were lucky enough to escape. Those who don't belong to Gotham will eventually leave Gotham. If anyone stays, then he must have originally belonged to Gotham. Does such a person exist? Where is he?" The Godfather seemed lost in thought. After a while, he made the sign of the cross on his chest and said, "I swore to the Lord that I would keep this secret for him." He didn't give Schiller a clear answer, but Schiller already knew who he was referring to. The next day, Bruce was called to Schiller's office. Schiller almost never called him over on his own initiative, so Bruce was curious about what Schiller wanted. They sat down on either side of the desk, just as they had when they first met, and Schiller asked him, "Have you ever, for even a second, thought about completely saving the city?" "Of course. I mean, after you have a very clear understanding of what the essence of this city is." Bruce opened his mouth, and Schiller took off his glasses, looking directly at Bruce and saying, "I think you should have already seen the essence of this city, that it doesn't need to be saved, and is fundamentally beyond saving. So, you're trying to persuade me to stop doing this? To stop being Batman? Of course not. I don't care whether you're Batman or not. I just want to know if you really want to save Gotham. What's the difference between the two? Are you sure you became Batman to save Gotham?" Bruce remained silent. "Let me ask you a different question. If there were a possibility of bringing a new order to Gotham right now, would you be willing to put in some effort for it? Although I have this suspicion now, I still can't be sure what the true nature of this city is, why it became like this, or if it is truly beyond saving. Falcone once told me that many people had tried to save the city, but they had all failed. Most of them were buried here, but some stayed, integrated into the city, and became a part of Gotham. Who is he? I think you can go see the only priest at Gotham Cathedral, and then come back to give me your answer." Bruce shook his head. He found Schiller somewhat inexplicable. However, he was also very interested in Gotham's past. The city had so many mysteries for him to explore. Initially, his goal was simple, to take revenge on all the criminals. But as he learned a part of Gotham, he felt he should also save the city. However, as he learned more about Gotham, he felt the city didn't need to be saved. Now, having relearned Gotham, he discovers that the city seems beyond saving. As Schiller said, Gotham is like a book that can never be finished. It has endless mysteries, and you will gain new insights every time you read it. When Bruce arrived at Gotham Cathedral, the priest warmly greeted him. The old priest looked to be over 70 years old. To be honest, there are very few ordinary people in Gotham who can live to such an old age. In Gotham, no one teaches children to help elderly people cross the street, because there are neither children nor elderly people to teach that. Before the pulpit, the priest smiled and took Bruce's arm, saying, "I've heard of Mr. Wayne's great name for a long time. Of course, I'm sorry I don't have anything better to offer you. After all, this church is too old, as old as I am. Look, these tables and chairs are almost falling apart. I wonder if any kind-hearted person will be able to replace them with a pulpit that doesn't need bricks to support the legs." Bruce was all too familiar with this kind of talk. He made the sign of the cross and said, "I will not receive any favors from the Lord. The Wayne construction team will give the church a complete renovation, making his kingdom as clean as new. Everything belongs to the Lord." The old priest seemed very satisfied with this, and when Bruce talked to him about the past, he did not try to hide anything, but spoke frankly about his experiences. "I come from an ordinary family in England. I worked in the church when I was young. I came here so that more people could hear the gospel of the Lord. Originally, I was just settling down in a small town on the East Coast, but I heard that Gotham was pretty good, so I came here. You might find it hard to believe, but actually Gotham was quite good back then. Because of the docks, it was a relatively prosperous place with a large population and good living conditions. By the way, the gangs were in their early stages back then, and there weren't many people in total. Back then, there were still some ordinary people here with dreams. They wanted to establish order here and grow together with this city. Of course, I thought so too back then. Then, the priest's voice grew lower and lower, echoing in the empty church. The colorful light shining through the stained glass windows at the top of the church windows was like a time tunnel, and the priest's voice seemed to travel back to that era through these tunnels. There were many people like that back then. They were ambitious and thought this was a gold coast, a new gold mine. Although there was some chaos at that time, everyone felt that it was just a normal pain in the process of urban development. A young missionary with a Bible in his arms set foot on this land with the fleet. The story of his long journey was not as dramatic as others imagined, but there were still quite a few people here who were interested in me. Of course, I spread my faith here, help everyone as much as possible, and mediate some of the more intense conflicts and disputes between gangs. Almost everyone is willing to give me face. Upon hearing this, Bruce began to look at the priest with new respect. This old man, a contemporary of Falcone, seemed to have once held a place in Gotham. In this gang-ruled city, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. No one would dare to fabricate such a story, claiming that all gangs would give him face. As far as Bruce knew, the only one who truly had this ability was Falcone. If anyone else dared to make such a boast, their body would be thrown into the sea the next day. But the old priest seemed to be talking about something trivial. Bruce sensed the humility in his tone and thought that perhaps this old man, who was a contemporary of Falcone, had once enjoyed the same prestige as His Holiness the Father. But now things are very different. Falcone has become the revered godfather of Gotham, but the old priest is now guarding a dilapidated church where no believers may come to pray for days. Bruce has always been quite curious about that era, which is somewhat faded and yellowed like a faded photograph, just as people always imagine the glory of their parents' generation. The story about the docks that Falcone had once told him depicted the rise of gangs during that turbulent era. But now, in this empty cathedral, what the elderly priest seems to be revealing to him is another side of the city in that era. When I arrived in Gotham, the war was far from over. Isolationism was rampant here, but most ordinary people were afraid of the war. They couldn't understand how things had suddenly turned into a mess on the other side of the world. I started spreading my teachings here. I believed that faith could bring peace to people's hearts. First, I did quite well. There were still many British people who hadn't left back then. They would invite me to their estates to listen to my sermons. I spent almost every afternoon like that. Initially, some small gangs only roamed around the docks, and very few could even get into the inner streets. That's when I met Falcone. But back then, there was no Falcone or the 12 families. You probably couldn't find 12 decent gangs in the whole of Gotham. Back then, this place was basically a colonial economy. Due to an accident, I started dealing with gangs. They wanted me to act as an intermediary to help them expand their power. I don't want to get involved in these whirlpools, but I have no choice. If I have to, I will choose the most promising one, which is Falcone. Later, many people began to realize that Gotham was not as good as they had imagined. The wealthy people from Britain began to gradually withdraw from the place and move to other more prosperous and promising places. The main legacy they left to this city is that manor area and this cathedral. After my persuasion, they collectively funded the construction of this place, and I became the only priest in this cathedral. So what happened next? What happened after that? When the upper echelons that maintain a stable order suddenly leave, those who fill the gaps in these upper structures are the ones with the most bullets in their guns. Falcone and his 12 families are such people. They caused trouble for a while, and then they took over here. I used to be a good partner with Falcone because I knew he was different from other gangsters. He wanted to create a new order here, even if it was a violent one, but it was still better than no order at all. I did everything I could to help him. I thought the gangs were just a temporary replacement for the hollowed-out upper blocks, and that one day Gotham would get back on track. But I didn't expect that everything would get out of control. After Falcone and his gang took control of the city, it began to become a real crime capital. From 12 gangs, there were 120 gangs, 1,200 gangs, and finally it became a city where everyone was a gangster and a criminal. Evil is spreading here, and I am powerless to stop it. I know that Falcone may feel the same way. Many people think he is the culprit behind Gotham's corruption, but I know very well that this is not the truth. Finally, the priest looked up and looked around the church. He said, "There aren't many buildings left from that era. I'm grateful that they left me a place like this, a place where I can have a home. Then why don't you leave? Even if you can't go back to your hometown, you can at least go to the cathedral in the metropolis. There are quite a few clergy there, and they live a good life." The priest said, "You don't understand. I not only witnessed how evil gradually infected this city, but I was also deeply involved in it long ago." He made the sign of the cross on his chest, whispered a few prayers, and then said, "The biggest lesson I've learned in this process is that this city will only accept those who truly belong here. Those heroes who really want to save this place will eventually leave because they don't belong here. So why is all this happening? I don't know, but I always firmly believe that I made the right choice back then. Falcone and I are both guardians of this city, not destroyers. In your eyes, the Godfather may be a success, ruling Gotham's underworld for 40 years, but I know, and Falcone and I both know, that we are both losers, only able to weave a fragile order in the abyss of sin to protect ourselves." The priest shook his head and said, "But unfortunately, I am just an ordinary person who has lived a little longer than others. What I know is even less than what Falcone knows. Or perhaps, Falcone doesn't know the real answer either." As the sun gradually set, the shadows of the tables and chairs inside the church grew longer and longer, and the light emanating from the stained glass windows began to flow onto Bruce. Finally, the old priest said, "I can only stay here and guard a piece of his kingdom, and after I die, this pure land will also disappear, just like countless hopes that have disappeared in Gotham. Of that group from back then, only Falcone and I remain. We're both old now, and perhaps when we both go to meet our Lord, the last vestiges of order in this city will cease to exist. Do you think it's possible to establish a new order? Countless people have tried to do this, but they have all failed. Falcone succeeded in a small part, but only temporarily. Perhaps no one can delay it any longer." As the old priest sighed, Bruce fell into deep thought again. Whenever Bruce hears these historical stories about his hometown, he can't help but feel the same longing and nostalgia that a returning traveler would feel. Because the story of Gotham is full of absurdity and despair from beginning to end. Everything that happens here has no cause and no result, and even people who personally experienced that era cannot explain it. In this mysterious journey to explore Gotham's history, the time machine's parts are always stuck by some foggy fragments. Whenever Bruce tries to fix the old, broken projector and uncover the truth, various forces always stop him. As Bruce walked out of the church, he began to ponder the question Schiller had asked him. The priest's answer was that the city probably wouldn't have much of a chance to establish a new order, and that it would fall into complete darkness after the older generation had all died. He suddenly came up with a strange analogy, but also felt it was very apt. All the evil that exists in Gotham City, and all the criminals who live here, are like grains of salt sprinkled from a salt shaker. This is a salt shaker that will never be empty. The person holding it slowly pours out some glistening salt grains, just like a patient angler preparing his bait. Bruce, who had just come of age, learned a fact earlier from his professors, from Falcone, and from the old priest. Gotham's current state is not a simple matter of natural evolution. Its original goal of punishing criminals may never be achieved, and it may never be able to completely save Gotham, because the salt pan above Gotham will never be empty. The crystal-clear salt, full of sin, arrives with the wind, just like the fine rain that never stops falling in the city of Gotham. But this did not frustrate Batman. Instead, it fueled his ambition even earlier. Batman had no desire to fly around these salt grains that were being given away like charity, like a stupid fish circling around bait, hoping the water would wash away some scraps to fill its belly. What he wanted to do was to crush the salt shaker, or rather, to do what he had done to Lewis, to appear behind him like a bat, casting a shadow over the smug man holding the salt shaker, making him tremble with fear at the sight of a bat. Then, you get this salt container and all the salt grains inside. If there is to be a salt shaker in this world that holds all criminals, then it would be best if that salt shaker belonged to Batman. It must also belong to Batman. Chapter 105: The Black Pyramid. Bruce never dreamed that after returning to Schiller and giving him a positive answer, he would hear such an amazing plan from Schiller. This professor, who described himself as an ordinary and good person, told him personally, "It's not Gotham that's wrong, it's the world." And for this purpose, Schiller came up with a plan that even made Bruce somewhat consider giving up, although the professor said it was just a flash of inspiration he had one morning. In this plan, Schiller elaborated on how he intended to bring a new order to Gotham. If Bruce had to summarize this plan, he could only say that the name Schiller Rodriguez would likely be recorded in history, but not for any good reputation. Rather, his professor would likely be hailed as the father of modern crime. In this plan, Gotham is described by Schiller as a perfect city with all the right conditions, except that this perfect refers to the black market. The first step of this plan is to connect the three major ports on the east coast of the United States: Gotham Port, Chicago Port, and Miami Port. Coincidentally, all three cities are known for their gangsters. When gangsters meet, tears well up in their eyes. And coincidentally, Gotham has a unique advantage in this regard. Even if the gangs of Chicago and Miami joined forces, they couldn't defeat the Gotham gangs. By linking these three cities together with Gotham as the leading city, they controlled almost half of the port trade on the east coast of the United States. None of these three cities alone could absorb the entire black market industry in the United States, but if the three port cities were combined, it would be far more than just 1 + 1 + 1 is equal to 3. The black market supply chain that a single port city cannot complete will be further developed and perfected by other downstream cities. With the three ports echoing each other and following the same hierarchical structure as the Gotham 12, with each level subdivided, they will be able to handle more than 70% of the black market supply chain in the United States. Most cities on the west coast of the United States are still considered lawful cities, such as Seaside City, where Green Lantern Hal is located, as well as Los Angeles and Seattle. Although the overall crime rate is not low, it is actually much better than that of the East Coast. Look at these cities on the East Coast. Gotham, needless to say, is the largest crime center in the universe. Miami is known for its tornadoes and gangs. Chicago is called a crime paradise, and its typewriters are famous throughout the United States. The national average crime index is 30 to 40, but the combined crime index of Gotham, Chicago, and Miami may exceed 300, making them a formidable force. What Schiller didn't mention in the plan he showed Bruce was that, as a time traveler, he knew that about 7 months later, in October 1987, there would be a Black Monday, a day when the country would experience a severe stock market crash, with stocks hitting their daily limit, businesses going bankrupt, large numbers of unemployed people taking to the streets, and the crime rate nearly doubling. The gangs received a surge of fresh blood, with many unemployed financial professionals leaving the industry to start their own businesses. Many previously insignificant street thugs began to transform into professional gangs, and large gangs with a new batch of professionals took a significant step towards becoming corporations and joint stock companies. Immediately following this, the Cold War will end, a large amount of military equipment will be withdrawn, and the negative consequences of excessive investment during the competition will gradually become apparent. Many people will be laid off. Most of these people have undergone professional military training, but they have no skills to make a living. After arming their minds, gangsters can also improve their physical strength. Then, the massive outflow of hot money caused by the 1987 stock market crash led to the 1994 Mexican economic crisis. Yes, Mexico's specialty is also, it is foreseeable that if this plan is followed, the next few years will be the most prosperous years for Gotham. Of course, Bruce didn't have clairvoyance. All he knew was that one of them, himself or the person who devised the plan, was definitely not normal. When you're trying to bring a new order to a crime-ridden city, what do? Most people might think about how to suppress gangs, or use violence to eradicate the root of crime from its source. But it will definitely not be, since I can't get better, then we'll all rot together. However, if this plan were to succeed, Bruce's brilliant mind had calculated it very clearly. Once Gotham's gangster model was applied to the entire East Coast, Gotham would become the top of this black pyramid, just like the Falcone family's current status in Gotham. Becoming the top of the pyramid of the largest criminal industry chain in the United States means that Gotham is very likely to become the most developed city in the country. Everyone in the city will be passively becoming the head of the phoenix, and even the last feather of the head will be more splendid than the other feathers. Of course, Gotham will not change its nature as a crime capital because of this. After all, the top of the black pyramid is also black. But what sets Gotham apart from other cities is that, Whether it's the head of a phoenix or the tail of a chicken, it's already rotten to the core. Gotham has no bottom line left to fall, so since it's going to be rotten anyway, why not make it a little more prosperous and thriving? Bruce had many opinions to express about the plan, but he kept them to himself, because he had already given Schiller a positive answer. He originally thought that this was just a question Schiller asked on a whim, like the countless questions the professor had asked him before, and that he would just need to think about it for a while, then give him an answer and the matter would be over. Empiricism ruined him. After Bruce gave him this answer, the professor quickly came up with such a meticulous, absurd, yet potentially very effective solution. Bruce suddenly felt like he had been tethered to a pirate ship. However, he had already promised Schiller, and he always felt a sense of pride in front of Schiller, so he agreed to participate in the preliminary arrangements. The first step in the preliminary planning was to replace Gotham with a new mayor. The previous mayor died in a traffic accident, and Gotham had been without a new mayor for some time. Generally speaking, the mayor of Gotham cannot be appointed because no one is willing to risk their life here. So most of the time, the Wayne Group pays people to come. Among so many politicians, there are always a few who are willing to risk their lives for money. But this time, Gotham has set its sights on the former mayor of Chicago. Just like Gotham, one of Chicago's 2 previous mayors died in a car accident, and the other committed suicide after being shot twice in the back. The former mayor is still alive because he is the head of the Gospel Gang, Chicago's second-largest gang. Schiller believed that such a resume would be suitable for the mayor of Gotham City. At least he had managed Chicago's traffic quite well, since most drivers would give way to the Chicago typewriter. So this leads to the scene at the beginning of the story where Bruce appears in Chicago and successfully woos the younger sister of the leader of the Gospel Gang. Of course, this wasn't the initial plan. Batman certainly wouldn't have come up with a plan to get close to his target by seducing women. However, the problem is that if Bruce wants to accomplish this, he can't use the identity of Batman. After all, Batman isn't that famous right now. He's only somewhat well known in Gotham and doesn't have any influence in Chicago. So, he naturally uses the identity of Bruce, the world's richest man. When Playboy Bruce arrives in a city, he naturally has to spend a few days eating, drinking, and having fun first. Otherwise, he would seem a bit too dedicated to his profession. Upon hearing that the world's richest man was coming, Bruce was invited to every ball imaginable. He attended several balls over 2 days, which included almost all of Chicago's socialites, including Roy Brown's younger sister, Tina Brown. She was very beautiful and a great dancer. The two were attracted to each other, and naturally, they quickly became a couple and their relationship blossomed. Bruce put his arm around Tina's shoulder and said, "That's how it is. I really can't find anyone suitable. Politicians don't last long in Gotham. I can't keep spending so much money just to buy a few months of peace. Can I?" Tina smoothed her hair and lay down on Bruce's back, saying, "I'm starting to wonder if you came here just in time. My brother's been in pretty much trouble lately, and he's looking for a place to hide. What's wrong with him? What trouble could he be in that even the leader of the Gospel Gang would avoid him like the plague? Just a few days ago, a 7 or 8-year-old boy died in a gang shootout. He was white and was shot on his way home from school. This incident has had a huge impact. If you've read the newspapers, you should know that there have been condemnations from many places. The Gospel Gang wasn't involved in this. After all, we're a branch of the mafia, and we don't advocate shooting each other all the time. But unfortunately, this happened on Gospel Gang territory, and we don't know which fool fired the bullet so far. My brother isn't afraid of the local gangs, but the Joint Investigation Team is a real problem. They're made up of legislators from several states, each with their own backing. It's not something that can be solved by just shooting them a few times. So your brother wants to hide away and avoid the limelight? Of course, if you're willing to spend some money to help my brother sort out this problem, the Brown family will thank you," Tina said. Bruce didn't care about the ulterior motives in her words. He knew from the beginning that Tina was after him. After all, Bruce's own motives weren't pure either. This was just an act. You should think this through carefully. Being the mayor of Gotham is not an easy job. Tina raised an eyebrow in surprise and said, "Don't you know? The godfather of the most famous Falcone family in Gotham was actually a branch that split off from the Chicago Mafia. We are actually from the same lineage. My father has always been in contact with this godfather. After he passed away, my brother even made a special trip to Gotham to visit Mr. Falcone. Of course, I know that my brother can't gain a foothold on just this favor, but if you stand on his side, things will be much easier." Bruce didn't say anything, but he felt that the most important thing the future mayor might rely on was that professor's crazy plan. The meeting with Roy took place on a Gotham morning. He was a typical Chicago mob boss, wearing a trench coat, a felt hat, and carrying a violin case containing the most famous Chicago typewriter. Schiller was very pleased with the new mayor, because in the time it takes to smoke a cigarette, he fully understood Schiller's intention to foster friendly cooperation and mutual development between the Gotham and Chicago mob gangs. He also strongly agreed that there was great potential in this area. Roy was a ruthless man. During the era when Chicago public housing gangs were rampant, he managed to hold onto the territory of traditional gangs by relying on the legacy left by the mafia. While Chicago's gangs may not be as terrifying as Gotham's, they are actually more complex. This is because they involve conflicts between traditional and modern gangs, as well as struggles between people of different races. Anyone who can survive such a complex situation is certainly not a fool. As a Chicago mob boss, he certainly wouldn't dare to collude with Gotham's mob, as that would be tantamount to inviting a wolf into the house. But if he could join the Gotham mob and then collude with the Chicago mob, he would become the wolf that breaks into the house. Moreover, he had a legitimate claim to the mafia, as the Falcone family was also a branch of the mafia, and the old Godfather Falcone was a true Roman with Italian blood flowing through his veins. What does it mean that the true mafia is in Gotham? This is a case of getting back to the source and tracing back to the origins. Because Roy knew so much about the mob, he knew that the plan had a very high chance of success. In this era, the idea of uniting to make the pie bigger is still relatively rare. Everyone is acting independently, but as long as the smart people among them can see the huge benefits that can be gained by doing so, they will naturally unite together. So Roy became a Gothamite without any burden, fast-forwarding straight to that wretched place, Chicago, and decided it was better not to stay there. An outsider from Chicago who comes to Gotham and tries to meddle will naturally be ostracized by the gangsters. But if that person is Falcone's godson, it's a different story. Some speculate that perhaps the Godfather felt that his own son, Evans, was not up to the task, which is why Roy came to Gotham. Although Roy is indeed a bit older than Evans, he is not much older and is still very young, making him a good candidate to succeed him. The first step of the plan yielded remarkable results, with the collaboration between Gotham's largest mafia family and Chicago's second-largest mafia family proving highly effective. They subdivided the cargo sources at the docks and redistributed the landing locations of cargo ships based on the different types of smuggled goods and the distance of logistics transportation. All the docks controlled by Gotham and the docks controlled by the Evangelical Fellowship in Chicago joined forces and quickly sorted out the somewhat chaotic smuggling routes that were operating independently. Of course, they didn't forget to attract investment from outside. In smuggling, everyone basically has some connections. At this point, they only need to pay a small price to enjoy preferential policies and the right to berth and transport goods at the important docks of two cities at the same time. They can even open up a new logistics channel between them to speed up the circulation of smuggled goods throughout the East Coast. This measure has been very effective, as evidenced by the continuously rising economic figures in Falcone's hands. Originally, the old Godfather was already in his twilight years, and his greatest wish was to quickly and smoothly hand over the Falcone family, so that his life's work would not be wasted. But now, Schiller suddenly served up a large cake, claiming it was just an appetizer, and Falcone's long-dormant appetite was suddenly revived. Falcone had been invincible in Gotham for far too long, but the Godfather's appetite was never small. When he saw Schiller's somewhat insane plans, Falcone suddenly felt that it wouldn't be impossible for him to rule Gotham for another 40 years. Falcone thought that if the Black Pyramid depicted in this plan could actually be realized, no, even if only half of it were realized, then perhaps the entire world's black industry would undergo a major reshuffle. The cigar in the hand of this once powerful Godfather went out, but what rose again was the immense ambition he had when he first set foot on this land. Standing before the manor's floor-to-ceiling windows, he heard the Gotham Cathedral bells ringing again, just as he had decades ago when he stepped ashore on the waves of the coastline, rising and falling in the tide of the city's sins. In countless dreams where he glimpsed the truth, Falcone recalled the dark clouds that blocked most of the raindrops during every Gotham rainstorm. Those were the first half of the Godfather's life. He thought dark clouds are still clouds, just as black pyramids are still pyramids. He hoped he would live to see that day, to see a pyramid rise from the ground of this land he both loathed and deeply loved, facing the agonizing rain. In his office, Schiller stood by the window, listening to the dull tolling of bells echoing over the city, drifting further and further away through the veil of clouds. Now, these thinning clouds are about to dissipate, and Gotham will face all this malice head-on. He thought that here only evil can deal with evil, and only deeper darkness can resist darkness.